Kingdom Hearts battle stances are weird. They've got dramatic flair, but are they practical? Honestly, I wouldn't have thought so, until I realized something important. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not a master fencer, nor have I ever sparred with anyone, so who am I to pass judgment on my spiky-haired brethren? That realization sent me down a rabbit hole of historical combat arts where I discovered a treasure trove of stances and movements, each with its own unique utility. It made me wonder, what does it mean for someone to favor a particular stance? Why would a character default to a specific posture? In character design, even the smallest details can offer a glimpse into a character's mindset. So, what if we applied a historical lens to one of our favorite series? What might the battle stances of Kingdom Hearts characters reveal about their personalities and roles? I may not be a master fencer, but I've done my research, and the internet is a bastion of knowledge I'm excited to share with you. So, hear me out. Driven by fury, Roxas clings fiercely to the fragments of his memories. Hear me out, his dual-wielding style doesn't perfectly match traditional techniques, but kinda resembles the Shuang Dao in Chinese martial arts, with fluid, rapid, and wide circular motions. The stance, however, I'm not so sure. Historically, dual-wielding usually paired a long weapon with a short one, making it easier to defend and attack without needing to shift stances constantly. It was a practical setup, used across different cultures because it just worked. Now, there are documents explaining how people used two long weapons in official duels instead of war, implying it was more about showing off than anything practical. And that's where Roxas comes in. He's not worried about practicality. When he points his blades at the enemy, shaking with anger, it's all about making a statement. He forces himself to wield Xion's Keyblade, not because it's efficient, but because it keeps her fading memory alive. For Roxas, holding onto that memory matters more than anything, and he's determined to bring her spirit with him as he fights for retribution. Oh boy, we have so much to cover with Roxas, cause dual wielding, although a more recent term popularized by fiction, does have a variety of historical context to dive into. It's not just modern day weebs who found this shit cool. Firstly, I mentioned the Shuang Dao. These swords were actually made to counter spears on the battlefield, by parrying them or straight up cutting the tip off, completely disarming the opponent like Zuko demonstrates. I did notice Roxas' combo does involve a lot of wide sweeping circular motions, so I figured it was worth an honorable mention. Before we go further, I want to address some comments from the original short. I always read my comments, so I've seen your input. Many of you pointed out that Roxas is indeed pairing a long weapon with a shorter one. While it's not as noticeable in recent games, Kingdom Hearts 1 classifies Oathkeeper's length as medium and Oblivion's as long. This difference was way more apparent back then, but nowadays they're presented as nearly equal in length. So yes, Roxas is following traditional dual-wielding methodology. However, I still wonder, exactly how long is Oathkeeper? It's shorter, but it's no dagger. So wouldn't it still be a bit too long to be considered practical? I'll leave the cross-referencing to any of you who want to try it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. For now, I'll just amend my original statement and say that Roxas is indeed following what could be considered the dual-wielding meta. A cross-cultural meta, in fact. The two katana style is a great example of a dual-wielding technique from a completely different part of the world that shares similarities with European methods. This just speaks to how naturally the human body adapts to wielding two weapons of different lengths. The demonstration you're watching is from the YouTube channel Let's Ask Seki Sensei, hosted by Seki Sensei, the 22nd headmaster of Kobudo Asayama Ichiden Ryu. This channel might as well be free tutoring on Japanese swordsmanship. They talk about the history of the two katana style, including the legendary Miyamoto Musashi, probably the most famous historical figure to teach it. Different schools may have their own interpretations, but they all share the common pairing of the wakizashi, a shorter blade, and the uchigatana, a longer blade. Interestingly, this style emphasizes becoming ambidextrous, allowing a fighter to wield a katana in either hand. A skill that could be crucial in real combat, where conditions are unpredictable and rarely fair. Although the style has its practical uses, its true value is in what one learns through the training itself. An approach that matches Roxas' experience fighting in the field against hordes of monsters. It's no surprise that he picked up dual wielding so effortlessly. Originally, I assumed Roxas was using two swords of equal length and called it impractical based on the historical context I could gather. On a chaotic battlefield with multiple enemies, various weapons, and constant distractions, efficiency is life-saving. Naturally, a warrior would want a pairing that requires less finesse and offers better defense. After all, there's no respawn on a real battlefield. That's why swords were often paired with large shields. It's easier than constantly maneuvering two swords to deflect attacks from all angles. Using two swords generally had advantages only in one-on-one scenarios, where one hand could parry while the other attacked. I got this particular information from the YouTube channel Scholagladiatora, hosted by Matt Easton, a historical researcher with over 20 years of experience in the archaeology of arms and armor. Based on his presentation of the subject, dual-wielding two swords was considered a display of skill, more common in dueling or classroom fencing scenarios than on the battlefield, at least in Europe. It was a way to showcase a fencer's prowess rather than a standard combat technique. With this context, you could consider it being more about sending a message, something Roxas is evidently trying to do with the second Keyblade. Nomura makes Roxas unlock a second Keyblade during a specific time in the story, after Xion's passing. From here on out, Roxas is hell-bent on destroying Organization 13. His memory of Xion is fading to the point where he can't even remember her name. But there is something pushing him to carry a second Keyblade nonetheless. All of these details point towards a futile attempt to keep her memory alive. He seeks retribution for what his friends suffered, and carrying the second Keyblade is more symbolic than anything else. This aligns with the context we discussed earlier about dual-wielding two swords. Roxas is not concerned about practicality. Driven by rage, the very tools his manipulators prized will become their undoing. Another detail that some of you pointed out to me is that Roxas' second Keyblade isn't Xion's, but rather Ventus's, something confirmed by Nomura himself in an interview. A noteworthy correction, but not impossible to adjust. There is no way Nomura did not intend for us to read this scene as Roxas carrying Xion's Keyblade. Roxas usually summons his Keyblade in his right hand, so I assume the left is meant to be the new one, and it appears as a second Kingdom Key, before transforming into Oathkeeper. Nomura must have at least intended for this Keyblade to symbolize Xion's Keyblade, as well as the Oath of Vengeance he took. Boy was out for blood after all. Hence his Keyblade becoming Oblivion. Maybe these specific transformations are coincidental, but Nomura loves visual storytelling. Regardless, we'll say Roxas symbolically is carrying Xion's blade, even though the ruling is it's Ventus's. With these adjustments, we can keep the integrity of the original analysis. Axel chases immortality by being unforgettable. Hear me out. Chakrams don't have a specific stance, but rely on different throwing techniques, like overhand, underhand, and sidearm. Axel uses a hammer grip on one while dangling the other on his fingers, both methods reflecting real handling styles, although twirling on a finger was done with smaller chakrams. His Keyblade stance, however, resembles a one-handed version of the posta de donna. With these videos, I focus more on the blade's position since it's easier to match to historical guards than the entire body. These guards weren't static poses, but rather the peak of a movement. Moving into posta de donna lets you transition into all 7 blows of the sword, making it a frequent position for delivering a memorable flurry of attacks. Axel embodies the fire he commands, a force of nature in an unpredictable dance of consuming strikes. He blends swordsmanship with a barrage of chakrams, a combination designed to leave a lasting impression. Axel's relentless assault is more than just a means to victory, it's his way of ensuring he'll never be forgotten. This is where the 1 minute limit really hurt. Axel, being the fiery character he is, actually has 2 combat styles, and it was painful to squeeze everything into such a short time. First up, his more memorable weapon, the chakrams, which originate from India. I have to point out that Axel's handle on the chakrams is probably the most unconventional shape I've ever seen. Traditionally, chakrams are gripped along the ring itself, similar to throwing a frisbee. This grip allows for an effective launch. I suspect Axel's cross-handle design makes them sturdier for close combat, sacrificing some throwing power for versatility. He swings them like blades and blocks attacks with them after all. Other than this slight deviation, he uses them pretty accurately. A hammer grip, as the name suggests, is when you grip the chakrams like a hammer, using your full palm. This is the sturdiest grip and works for all three conventional throwing techniques: overhand, underhand, and sidearm. Overhand starts with the chakram raised at a 90-degree angle, and then brought down, like swinging a hammer. Underhand is the opposite, beginning with the chakram down and winding upward. Sidearm follows the same motion, but is angled at 180 degrees from the side. The demonstration on screen isn't just from Axel, but also from YouTuber Adam Celadin, whom I can best describe as an expert in throwing weapons, as evidenced by his plethora of videos featuring sharp, pointy objects in action. Axel demonstrates each of these handling techniques as well, though he doesn't launch the chakrams as far as possible, likely due to the cross-handle making it harder. Axel also dangles one of the chakrams on his fingers, which would be a tricky throwing technique, but not impossible. You'd spin the chakram on your finger to build momentum, then release it at your target. This move requires even more finesse to pull off, something Axel wouldn't be able to fully achieve because of the cross-handle, which would limit rotation. Not to mention, his chakrams are huge, making them even more challenging to maneuver. This brings us to another surprising aspect of Axel's fighting style: a sword stance where the weapon is held behind the body. It may seem odd, but this stance makes sense when you consider the flow of combat. A real swordsman doesn't hold poses for long. Stances like these are meant to be transitioned into during battle, with attacks flowing naturally from one stance to another. This is technically true for every stance we've covered so far, but it's especially relevant here because posta di donna, or woman's guard, isn't meant to be held for as long as Axel does. Posta di donna is a foundational stance in the Italian longsword tradition, documented by the 15th century fencing master Fior dei Liberi. Fior introduced the guard as having two versions, and although he claims they are the same, Federico highlights that one could be considered a position, the stance used during an attack, and the other is the guard, the stance you take when you're out of your opponent's reach, ready to attack or defend. The demonstration here is by Federico Malaguti, a HEMA sword instructor since 2014, who has also studied martial arts and archery, a classic D&D fighter in real life. Fior also outlines 7 foundational strikes that a swordsman can make, combining downward, upward, and horizontal cuts, as well as thrusts. Posta di donna provides a fluid transition for any of these attacks, making it highly adaptable and allowing for strategic control in close combat. A perfect match for Axel's fiery personality. When I think of fire, I envision something chaotic and all-consuming, much like a flurry of sword strikes. A stance that could be considered the initial spark for all possible sword strikes perfectly complements our favorite redhead. It's what enables him to create a flurry of attacks resembling the unpredictable surge of fire, rapidly deconstructing whatever it touches. The chakram's association with fire is a bit more straightforward. Returning to its cultural origins, the Sudarshana chakra is a divine discus wielded by the deity Vishnu in Hindu mythology. It is often portrayed as radiating a brilliant, blazing light that consumes all evil forces in its path. This connection to fire not only references the mythological roots of chakrams, but also subtly foreshadows Axel's eventual shift to the forces of light. In both stance and weapon, Axel embodies the transformative and consuming nature of fire. Chaotic, adaptable, and ultimately illuminating. Xion is a defender, a fighter motivated to react to the world's violence to protect the people she cares about. Hear me out. I previously said Xion's fighting stance. As a replica meant to inherit Sora's abilities, it's no surprise that Xion incorporates the same stance. However, this isn't a reflection of her character, but rather the purpose she was created to serve. While we're meant to notice the similarities between her and Sora, I believe these are surface level. When you closely examine her combat, the way she dashes across the battlefield and manipulates pillars of light is shared by only one other person, Roxas. It's their connection that brings Xion to life, unlocks her powers, and threatens the status quo. Xion spends much of her time seeking answers about her existence, and her identity centers on making a choice for herself with the life she's been given. Her fighting style, while borrowing from Sora, ultimately branches into something uniquely hers and Roxas's. As a being who was never meant to exist, this reflects Xion's struggle to have some sort of control. Xion borrowed more than just Kairi's hair, as I faced the same dilemma of figuring out what I could say about Xion that didn't simply repeat Sora. However, in her case, the replication feels more intentional. Xion inherited Sora's memories and trained alongside Roxas, Sora's nobody. It's understandable that she would adopt the same battle stance as Sora. If we were to assign the same insights from Sora to Xion, we might label her as a defender as well. After uncovering the truth about her existence, she selflessly prioritizes safeguarding others. She chooses to sacrifice herself on her own terms to restore Roxas' strength and help Sora awaken. While this decision might seem like a reflection of Sora's memories, given his history of self-sacrifice, it would be incredibly reductive to stop there. The struggle for identity is the central theme of 358 Days Over 2. Both Roxas and Xion begin their journey as blank slates, devoid of identity or individuality. Instead, their sense of self is shaped by the labels and expectations imposed on them by others, including key supporting figures from the earlier games. Xion's lack of a stable physical form underscores this even further. As an imperfect replica, her appearance shifts based on the memories of those around her. Sayax sees nothing more than a blank puppet, incapable of individuality, because that's all he believes her to be. Yet Roxas recognizes the unique person within her, and their bond brings her humanity into sharper focus, even for Axel. This relationship solidifies what we affectionately call the Days Trio. If you've played 358 Days Over 2, rather than just watching the cutscene compilation, this journey of self-discovery and connection becomes even clearer. It is an injustice how many character moments are stuck on the DS. Because of this, reducing Xion to merely copying Sora feels deeply disingenuous. So, I turned to the story's core message and asked myself, what sets Xion apart from her origin? After watching her boss fight on repeat, I started noticing something remarkable. Xion fights like Roxas. Comparing Xion's data battle to Roxas's, you can see clear similarities. Both use light to dash across the battlefield, summon magical pillars, and execute incredibly aggressive combos. I believe this was deliberate to highlight their relationship. This fighting style reflects the time they spent training together. Rather than finding insights of Xion's character solely by her stance, perhaps it's better to define her through the movements and techniques that evolved from it. An analysis that aligns perfectly with her arc of becoming something more than the circumstances of her creation. I really appreciate your patience with this one. It took longer than I hoped, but I'm aiming to get the next video out a little faster. We're about to dive into some real reaches with the next trio. So if you want to see the next chapter, don't forget to like and subscribe. All my links are in the description. And as always, my people, thank you for watching.